So it's important to remember that the March 8th is the date of a major women's worker strike in Petrograd in Russia in 1917 during the First World War, where women workers basically came out and protested, asking for bread and peace. As you might know, the First World War was really a war that destroyed, was a major loss of life. We're living in a time of war again, where the use of weapons and this part in this century has gone kind of beyond our imagination. We don't even know how to keep count of who is allowed to do what to each other anymore. But back in the First World War, the sheer loss of life through new weapons and the kinds of fronts that were open. So for me, that bread and peace slogan has shaped my entire thinking about what it is, what does it mean to ask for rights, and what does it mean to be a woman who is also a worker, who is also a carer, who is also a professional, who is also a student, and where the identity of a woman is not separated from all of these other histories, right? So we don't have the luxury to be women defined narrowly, right? I think the premise of Women's Day is that what it means to be a woman, visibly and invisibly, has to be understood and acknowledged and celebrated, and also remembered, most importantly, because it's not just an identity. It is not a role we play. It is being inheritors of an entire history of social production, of care, dignity, labor, all forms of imposed by patriarchy, imperialism, white supremacy. So I don't see the identity of the woman as one among many. I think it is something that can enclose a lot of these histories. If we read someone like, say, Catherine Malibu, there might be a way to even understand that what we now understand to be violence is fundamentally, like, the premise of that has always been that history has landed on bodies of women and people of color, and it's the formative ground for all geopolitics and economics institutions we have today. So it's not just, for me, a matter of rights. So the bread and peace slogan, that again, Women's Day didn't become Women's Day until 1975. But it's not that women started to ask for rights in 1975. It was a UN year to celebrate the woman, and then they decided that this date was an appropriate date. Even March 8th, 1917, had a long prior history of women struggling not just for their own rights, but for abolition, not just for their own rights, but for peace, not just for rights to be equal to men, but to be able to vote and participate in the decisions that affect them, just like workers have, just like children have, just like anybody who's been marginalized has. And I think the strength of that history of women's struggles is in the capacity to bring many struggles together in a way few other standpoint struggles are able to do. So I really hold on to that plethora, that complex, that consummate idea of struggle and dignity that comes from bringing lots of struggles together under the women's movement and in relationship to racism, in relationship to labor. I will leave with one last thought, is that actually, because women's struggles as we know them began first from racial struggles against slavery, and then from struggles at work and for rights of labor, the slogan before bread and peace was actually bread and roses, which I think encompasses really that sense of beauty and wonder and celebration of the world as we receive it, right? But also the idea that there are things we must claim from it, and not just for us, but for everybody.
So, moving to the second question, what are the biggest challenges that women still face today?
Yeah, I think it's so tricky, right? Because, I mean, when I teach the history of feminisms and feminist struggles, where again, for me, the question of feminism is not about whether women are better than men or not. It's just the acknowledgement that each of these roles carries different burdens, in a sense that they are, again, totalities of various kinds of relations, right? So it's not that masculinity and femininity are opposites of each other, but they are in different relations to different realities, right? So it brings the richness to each of these things we embody and put out in the world. So the struggle, for me, the current challenges have a lot to do with the way women are still having to constantly confess and present themselves as rightful claimants to anything, right? It's still not an assumption that is made. It is still the idea that we are trying to, we have to be like men, right? Or in order to claim things, or we run the risk of being unheard or invisible or hypervisible, which is also something that very much is in common with racism, right? So I don't think that you can separate, history of class privilege, history of racial privilege, history of gender privileges from each other, because when we do that, we get really insipid and not courageous forms of feminism, right? Because it becomes about we fight for feminists, for women, but we talk about people below us, even if they're women, as if they were not one of us, right? We, again, there's a long history of saying like how many people in the global south who fight for women's rights are all bourgeois and, have access to other women's labor. But I think it's not just a matter of gotcha or saying like, oh, you should be pure and you shouldn't. But I think there's a real lack of our constant complicity in the systems we are trying to break. And I think there's a way that the idea of women in power or women breaking the glass ceiling has come about that completely detaches it from other people's struggles and makes it some sort of a competition to have a part of this world, which is fundamentally unjust and unfair, instead of asking to create a new world, which is what I thought we were supposed to be doing, right? We don't want a share of something we don't like. We want to make a new world. And that is the spirit I inherited, from women's struggles and from people in my family, from reading feminist authors everywhere, that they were talking about language, they were talking about roles in the family, they were talking about love, they were talking about sex, they were talking about professions, they were talking, that the realm of conversation about womanhood was not just I am a woman and hence, I will fight for, this is the lens through which I see the world, and in it's something that cannot be. I think the idea was that this was a lens with lots of fractals. This was a lens that could truly pull lots of things together. And I think we're losing that in this kind of way of always trying to go to the top or finding success in normal forms in terms of wealth and property and a nice husband or a rich husband, or and then gets reflected back in different societies into what are men wanting. I had a conversation yesterday with students and yes, men tell us you don't have the surname, or so I think that part is that looking inside at ourselves is missing, what our societies have done to us is missing, because we grab onto ideas of success that came from somewhere else, and we stopped challenging that our role was something else. So I think that's that separation of questions of women's success and power from all these other intersectional realities that makes us complicit with what we don't like, I think is a problem for me.
Yeah, that was very good answer. Moving to the third question. What role can universities like Al-Akhawain play in promoting gender inequality? Knowing that, for example...
Equality, yes, yes.
Equality.
Yes.
Knowing that, for example, now in school we have the gender studies minors.
Right. So I think universities are unique institutions. They're complex, right? Like any institution. But I think we build institutions because we can't do something alone. So the fundamental idea of the institution is the building of a collective project, because when we come together, we do something different than when we were alone. That is also the core of most struggles from the margins, right? Whether women's struggles, early consciousness raising, movements in the 80s, like where people were like, yeah, let's just talk to each other. And so the things that are happening to us in the home can be problematized, because we don't know if my husband hitting me is love or is not love, right? But let's talk to someone else who can tell me, yeah, that's sort of not okay, right? So, this is not something that's peculiar to the East. This was happening in the US, in the UK. So again, there's not such a vast difference as we often try to say about progress in women's realities. Our countries, like Pakistan, had suffrage before the US had suffrage, for women. So, I'm just saying so it's I've stopped dealing with that question of who's ahead or who's behind, because all sorts of progress are always also inverting themselves on our heads, basically. Like we see now, we progressed and then we are dehumanizing at the same time. So I think my understanding of the university, and I would say with its primary role of being a community first, and a community of learning, right, of people who come together because knowledge means something and the knowledge has to be enacted through that community. I think there are all ways in which we enter the conversation around, what is the subject? Like, who will you become in the world, and what will you be able to do, and what will you be unable to do? Because I think that's become even more important now, that it's not only trying to produce capacities, but to choose what we will never do, what we want to be incapable of doing. I want to be incapable of killing a dog on the street. I want to be incapable of, hitting someone, of shooting someone in the face to get something I want. No, I'm incapable. I should be incapable of stabbing friends in the back. I should be incapable of betraying small promises that I make to people I love and those who expect something of me. So I think institutions have a primary responsibility in producing that form of mutuality, reciprocity, accountability to each other. So I think accountability, not just knowledge, but accountability for that knowledge. But the other thing which I get from a thinker who often talked about, willing our own subjection. So I'll get a little bit theoretical in this case, where for me, the question of educating women or being women in institutions is inseparable from colonial realities, because both feminism, right, as a method, and post-coloniality or colonial criticism of coloniality as a method, right, in terms of knowledge production, other things, are fundamentally connected, because they help us understand why we desire situations of our subjection, of our submission, right? Yes, we know marriage, property, all of these things are problems, but we kind of still want it, right? We know that, for instance, the colonizer loves and hates us, right? There's a very intimate relationship of disgust, but also this desire. And I think part of the role of the educator, of the university within which education happens, is to, in a way, deprogram us to think, to want what destroys us. And I think that in that sense, we come from histories where our mothers always thought of themselves as martyrs. Like they were always the ones sacrificing. They were always the ones saying, like being treated as people who could do anything, and then they carried that through their lives. We took the benefit of that, but are we changing those relationships? Are we entering the same ones again? So that reproduction, that role of reproduction, reproducing harmful and destructive relations of closeness, of intimacy, of desire, I think that is the role of an educational institution in relationship to how we become subjects and what we start to want as those subjects. So I think for women, for young people in general, those of you who are in the streets asking for, dignity, okay, what does actually asking for dignity mean? How is it consistent with all the other things we say we need, right? Like we need a job. Okay, at what cost do you want that? Like what cost to the environment? What cost to yourself, to people like you? Who will you push down to get there, right? So I think that idea of framing, of questioning our desire for certain things that hurt us and society, I think that's the role of an educational institution. So yeah, I didn't answer the question of gender equality in the previous one, but I kind of redirected to the question of capacity, right? How do we want to learn to be capable and incapable of things and to make the decision? I think the role of students is the only role I have any hope for, because I think, one, the role in producing a community that pushes you to want different things, to question, to not surround yourself with people who only agree with you and a certain kind of idea of success, where you can feel challenged, but still create trust with each other, so the society becomes less competitive, less about wanting to be equal with each other or above each other, than what are we doing? What are we wanting to be equal for? Older philosophers used to constantly talk about freedom from and freedom to. And I want to ask the same question as a political philosopher. Like, what are we wanting to be equal? What is gender equality wanting to equalize? If it is equalizing the capacity for violence, sorry, I don't want it. If it's equalizing the capacity to work with the worst values of an economic domination, a dominant economic system, like I would like to not be equal in that way. So I think the question of equality is not a quantitative one. It has to be a qualitative one, and the terms have to be determined by the people asking for equality, because, and I mean, I come from a persuasion where I feel like we don't need to ask for things, we should just practice them. So the more we train ourselves and surround ourselves with people who want us to feel our power, to recover our sense of selves and to discover who we are, we will not even be asking for certain things from people who decide who's equal or not. We will just behave as if we are. And I think that's the beginning, right? I mean, Jacques Rancière talks about declaring oneself as equal. I think we should declare ourselves as equal and we should act as such, but it doesn't mean sameness. It doesn't mean to be equal to a bully means that I will be a bully. Maybe. I mean, I think can imagine certain circumstances fighting for justice where I would pick arms. So, but we need to, that's not being a bully. That's self-defense, that defending people I love, that's correcting an unjust system. I'm not trained to do it, so I won't. But I have other I have other arms. I think. I have a sharp brain. I love books. I read, read lots of people. I want to teach people to read differently so that we may desire something different. And when we come together, we don't want the things we wanted before when somebody wanted us to be equal to men. We want something else. And then we're never conscious about who claims to be a woman or a man. Like, why are we gatekeeping things? Why are we gatekeeping success? Why are we gatekeeping who has a voice? We speak and we refuse to speak. I mean, I see what drives me insane sometimes is looking at these little things that come up on YouTube which are trying to teach you how to speak authoritatively. Don't ask questions like, how was your weekend? And I just keep thinking, who are the people seeing this? Like, what does it mean to speak authoritatively? What does it mean for someone not to be able to listen to someone think? Like, where are our capacities going? Do we want to just be able to hear this much and not this much? Do we want to be able to see only this much and not this much? Our Quran tells us, our hearing and our samaat and our basarat are both things that are ours to cultivate, and it's a gift. Why are we constantly narrowing ourselves to specialize? I can only hear one thing. I will not, So I think we have to learn how to speak and to listen and to broaden the scope of experience of people when we are making decisions. And I think that's when I ask students, don't complain simply, just make something happen, right? Don't feel helpless in relationship to Palestine or something. Do something that feels like you are doing in their name, right? And create a situation to counter one of injustice, right? Do a right where something was done wrong. And that is our power. And nobody can take that, or nobody has to give it to you. That's I think what young people have that older people lose with time. Your courage. Yeah.
The last question for this interview is that what message would you like to share with female students at Al Akhawain on this International Women's Day and
Yes.
to women all around the world?
Yeah, I think love a lot. Don't apologize for your presence or your words or your speech or thinking out loud. Apologize when you hurt someone, but when you harm someone. But take care of each other. I think it's really, really important to have good friends. Realize all the privileges you have when you're interacting with someone who may look like you or be your classmate but might have suffer from inequities you can't see. I know that happens at AUI. I have had children of people who work here come and tell me how they're not included by women students from other backgrounds, and I think that that's a pity and a shame that we should be the ones breaking down these barriers and being the ones who have the capacity to right the world's wrongs and to make unequal situations equal for people like us, not to make them harder for the person who comes after us, because that's a lot of the resentment that is also carried in places where people feel a lot of injustice and wrong is done to them, that sometimes we lose the generosity of wishing something good for someone else because we didn't get it. And I think that is something, as an administrator, it's a really sad thing when you're trying to transform things, and sometimes there's just this feeling like we come in our own ways all the time because we didn't have something that someone else could have. But our experience is the one enabling that person to have it. So what's so wrong, So I think that is something that I would love for all of us to, and I think we are living in a time where we are hearing about Epstein, we are hearing about the rates of, abuse in families from people who are close to us. In Karachi, in Pakistan, such a big country, but on one hand you have so many women out there in the fields and educated, and there is also within Pakistan and India, I think there's a really high rate of sexual abuse and sexual violence as compared to, so how do you pair that up? And so those contradictions, we can't just ignore. We have to own them, because at some point, we're all benefiting from this system that may remove one inequality but create another vulnerability. And I think that is my biggest concern, is that we, in order to get what we want, might forget how we made somebody else vulnerable. And we haven't made the world better for someone else, because that is something that we have been given by our religion. Leave something better, like remove a stone from someone's way. These are all sadaqah, right? We have to do that. And we can't just live and stew in anger and resentment towards a world that has been unjust or we feel is unjust. We have to produce another world. And we can all do that without feeling constantly like we are disempowered. And no one else will come and give you power. We have to do it. We all have it. We just have to do something with it. So yeah, I think that's my feeling, and especially around just so much the sense of vulnerability and weakness and fragility that has been exposed, the abuse, the kind of violence that has been perpetrated not by a single man, but entire networks of powerful men. And I think we should not forget that it's happening around us somewhere, and protect each other. Bring male friends into the picture to show them what life is like. Create solidarities. Create fusions rather than partitions. That is our job. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
It was a wonderful interview.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.